Good afternoon, everybody. This is Dr. Mike Talbot. I'm here to host our webinar this afternoon on social media in workplace conflict. I'm delighted that so many of you have been able to join us. That's great. And you have the facility of a chat box on your screens, just by the way, before I start, in case you want to make any comments or questions as I proceed with our webinar this afternoon. Please do feel free to comment or chat. I'll try and address comments as we go along, and anything that we don't manage to pick up, we can have a Q&A at the end. I'll be talking for about 35 to 40 minutes, and after the 40 minutes or so, we'll have a few minutes of Q&A. So hopefully there may be things that you want to pick up or discuss after the presentation. Just a quick word before we go into the presentation, and that's to say that here we are. Yes, that's to say that who we are. Just very quickly, I'm Dr. Mike Talbot. I founded UK Mediation about 19 years ago. We're an organisation that works with conflict in all its forms. We resolve commercial disputes, neighbourhood disputes, disputes within families who are trying to stay together, and we work particularly in workplace disputes. So we work a lot with HR departments and senior management, looking at how to resolve conflict in the workplace. And we also train people to do what we do. So this afternoon, the part of all of that repertoire that I'm going to be talking about is to do with social media in particular, and how social media can contribute to disputes developing. What contribution social media, talking about platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, can contribute to the development of disputes, and how social media can also perpetuate conflict. How things that could easily have been solved early on with a conversation can actually turn into something bigger as a result of people using social media, or the vagaries of those platforms and how they work. And the other way that social media can get people into trouble at work. So what is it about the use of social media during work time that tends to lead to bother? And I've got a few things to say about social media policies. What's needed really, what do we have to have in a social media policy? I can't give you full chapter and verse this afternoon, I'm afraid, but what kind of things might avoid these issues of conflict that I'm going to draw attention to this afternoon. Then the question, can social media be a force for conflict resolution? Are there ways that we could use some of those very same platforms as a medium for resolving conflict, resolving the kind of conflict I'm talking about? And this is an interesting question, something that's quite current at the moment, people talking about online mediation. So we'll have a bit of a discussion about that as well, and then a brief bit at the end about what we can offer, what UK Mediation's got that might help you in your workplace to get over some of these problems. So let's have a look at the first part of this. Some stats. Wouldn't be a webinar without some stats. So let's have a look. So some figures here from Robert Half International. We've done a bit of research around all these issues that could lead to conflict around social media. Here's a figure. 57% of managers feel uncomfortable when a staff member sends them a friend request. So that's an interesting statistic. More than half of managers would be disquieted about a friend request that comes from a staff member. It's clearly a mismatch of expectation there about what staff members think we're using social media for, and what managers would expect. Managers don't want it, apparently. The next statistic I would say is that more than 2/3 of employers use social media to screen candidates. So this has become very, very prevalent in the last 10 years or so. So people applying for a job they put their application in, and employers will straight away look up, see if they've got a Facebook account, and then screen candidates on the basis of what posts they've got on their Facebook account. So, whatever they might read into that, whatever they might infer for what people are posting on their Facebook, the employer uses that as a form of screening or judgment about whether that candidate is suitable to be working in that company. And certainly we have, in the last 19 years, our mediators have come across situations. One springs to mind in particular, where somebody was turned down for a job on a basis of what the employer saw on their Facebook post. It was in the latter stages of a job application process that the employer actually looked at that person's Facebook, and as a consequence they were dropped from the shortlist. There was quite a significant dispute happened as a consequence, and mediation was used to successful effect, I'm pleased to say. So that's gone up massively from only about 10% up to more than three-quarters of employers using social media to look behind what candidates actually present of themselves and to look at who they really are. 17% of workers admit to using it within work time to learn about a colleague. So it's not just using it within work time, but actually using it to learn about a colleague, new starters in particular, so new people come on the block. A lot of workers will look up their social media accounts just to see who they are really, and a lot of workers are going to be doing that during working time as well. Okay, so some statistics there. Let's have a think about, why is this a problem? Why how does social media contribute to the development of disputes? I think it's fair to say, quite commonly encountered is people posting disparaging comments about others. We see this in workplace disputes all the time, where people are, if you pardon the jargon, bitching about other people behind their backs, making sort of aside comments about people, not necessarily being visible to the target of the post, but they get to hear about it. Disparaging comments about others to get posted on, commonly on Facebook, but more and more on Instagram as well. These then get shared or retweeted around the office, and you can get to the point where most people have seen them, most people have heard the comment. It's rather like a gossipy conversation over the water cooler, but it's invisible. We're hiding behind our keyboards, we're hiding behind our tablets and our phones, and actually making these comments about others, which then get exponentially shared. The more people share them, and the more that those people share them, very soon we get very, very wide distribution of these disparaging comments, which might be based on gossip or hearsay. And then others misinterpret what they see on social media. So in the absence of a proper conversation, in the absence of anything to back up the comments that folks are making about each other, others can misinterpret what they read on social media, and they say wantonly or otherwise. So sometimes there is clearly a motive to how people misinterpret these posts, or it could be inadvertent. But the other people will misinterpret what they see on the social media, and what happens then is the gossip abounds, and quite often the gossip will get back to the target of the initial comments. So A makes comments about B which are disparaging, the whole office shares them, everybody has a look and misinterprets it, maybe just sees it at a glance as they're swiping through all of their posts and their messages. And then the gossip mill begins. It quite often gets back to the person who's being maligned in the first place, so it gets back to B, even though A hadn't intended that it should get back to B. And then there's poor dialogue about the upset that gets caused. So we're into dispute land by this point. So conflict's normal and natural. Conflicts can be acted out on social media in quite a healthy way. But when we're into this sort of realm, then we're into the realm of disputes. And then there's no dialogue or poor dialogue about the upset that's being caused. Things don't get discussed properly, and we've got ourselves a dispute. So these are the sorts of ways that things can get started, and over the years, and especially in the last 8 or 10 years or so, mediators have certainly seen that in many areas of working life, it's expected that if something's going wrong between two people, it's expected that you're going to see a Facebook post about it, or you're going to see something on Instagram. It's the exception now that we don't see something where social media has partly contributed to the development of a dispute. I'm going to look in a bit more detail about that, but first of all, let's think about how social mediator can sort of perpetuate disputes. So these things that you see on the screen now, they could happen, and provided people sat down and had a good dialogue about it, possibly in the presence of an impartial third party, then we should be able to disentangle this, and we should be able to get to the bottom of it, find out who said what to whom and what their intention was, and possibly unravel the whole thing. But we don't tend to have those conversations, and the problem is when social media gets involved at this stage, actually the perpetuation of this dispute is even worse. People are going to sort of redouble the conflict and really take it to a different level by what happens after the dispute has started. So let's have a look at that bit. So how does social mediator actually perpetuate these kind of disputes and conflicts? Whether they've started on social media or not, they may have started in another way. But think about a conflict you've been involved in the workplace, and most of us have had some kind of a poorly managed conflict in the workplace, I would dare to suggest. And this is how social media can actually perpetuate that. One problem is that people retweet and share without comment, and this is something we see a lot, where there's an implication there that they're agreeing or endorsing the initial tweet or post, especially tweets. I find, because you've got limited characters, it's very hard to get subtle meanings across. If your tweets are not subtle in the first place, no names mentioned, Donald Trump, then and people passing those on, it can look as if you're actually siding with the with the account holder, with the person who's made the initial tweet. But it's a hard medium. If you're not commenting, it looks like you're endorsing or backing up or supporting the thoughts and feelings of the initial poster, and that is a really tricky thing. Yeah, sure, you can delete the tweet when you realise what you've done, but by that time it's been shared hundreds or thousands of times. It's out there, you can't do a thing about it. So retweeting or sharing without comment, and this suggestion or this implication that you're then agreeing with or endorsing that tweet, is a big problem, and this really perpetuates the conflict. Sometimes even when people are trying to resolve the conflict, what they put out there, when others appear to endorse or back it up, can actually make things worse. The other thing that we know happens, and this is any of you out there who've got teenagers will know about this one, you youngsters who exclude others and selectively include others on their distribution list, cut people out. Friend groups can get fragmented and broken even by failing to include somebody on a distribution list or deliberately excluding somebody from a distribution list. I've seen this a lot with youngsters, but I'm afraid us adults are often as guilty as well. Is a real problem when the gossip mill starts to turn. So some people get to hear about stuff and some don't, and it can cause real resentments. There's an in-group and an out-group. People feel as if they're being excluded. People feel as if they're not party to what's going around that everybody else knows. And you can picture the looks around the office when some people know stuff and some don't. And also the passing glances that you get when a new post arrives, or there's a new comment or retweet that arrives on people's tablets and phones, when some people have got it and some people haven't. The next thing as well is that we project, if you'll pardon even more jargon. So my own approach to sort of mediation and conflict resolution is based very much on my own experiences as a psychotherapist. So I worked as a psychotherapist for quite a few years before I came into this mediation field, and some of the ideas that we use in psychotherapy I find really useful in terms of conflict resolution. And one thing that we do when we're in conflict is that we project a lot. We guess what other people are thinking and feeling without fully knowing what it is. Now, this is an issue in face-to-face mediation and conflict that's got nothing to do with social media. So quite often when we get into disputes, we guess what other people are thinking and feeling. And we hear expressions like, oh, he thinks he owns the place, or she thinks she can talk to people like dirt, or he thinks he can do what he likes, or she keeps she keeps sucking up to the manager, or he just wants to get a promotion. So we see a lot of mind reading, if you like. So projection is about mind reading. It's about looking at someone else and imagining that you know what they're thinking and feeling. Now, in the use of social media, and especially in terms of how social media perpetuates interpersonal conflict, what's going on is that we very much, based on limited characters, very abbreviated language, we tend to project quite a lot, and we guess what's in the mind of the person who's putting out a post or a tweet, and those thoughts and feelings don't necessarily belong to that person. We guess what their motivations are, and our guesses tend to be negative. We tend to suppose that somebody has got a bad motivation or a bad motive for putting a particular comment out there, and that's not necessarily the case. Arguably, when we project, when we read things into people's activities, when we guess what they're thinking and feeling and what might be their motivations, arguably it's about our own stuff. It says more about us than it does about them. So this projection, it's a big issue in conflict anyway, but I think it's redoubled when we're looking at very limited information exchange, such as you might get over social media. The next problem, sorry, there's two jargon words in this one as well. So we deflect. We pretend everything's okay when it isn't. So as we walk to the tea room with this person who we know has been posting malicious or unkind tweets in the morning, and we smile at them. The smile doesn't quite go to the eyes, and we tend to, through clenched teeth, pretend that everything's okay when actually it isn't. So there's this problem that it's kind of the sort of conflict that dare not speak its name, the sort of stuff that gets exchanged on social media. It's almost like it's in a different realm or world. We suppose that, okay, it's only on Facebook. I didn't intend people to see it. It was meant to be private. But it's not the case. So we deflect then from the conflict. It's a real problem. You know, if somebody said something to you in a workplace and you didn't like it, you might take them aside, find a good time and place, and address it with them and make sure you talked it out. But it's not quite so easy to do over social media unless you get into this battle of words with the to and fro sort of adversarial battle with people over social media. Unless you get into that, the other medium is actually to confront people face to face. And I think less and less are we having these robust assertive dialogues with people face to face. I say they're necessary. I say you know, we're better off not pretending that everybody's on the same page in the workplace. I think we're better off acknowledging that we do have differences with people. We have controversial individual views sometimes. And it's important to express these and to learn to live with conflict and to appreciate that it's a healthy force for change. But when we deflect from conflict and when we deflect from things that might have happened on social media, all we do is make everything worse. And the other word I've got in here is retroflect. This is again something that comes from sort of the world of psychotherapy. It's about holding back on what really needs to be said. So not just pretending there's no conflict, but actually swallowing down things that need to be said. Holding back on these things. Now, the anger that we can feel when somebody is hostile towards us or makes malicious comments about us or our friends, that anger doesn't really go away. And the more we fail to express it, the bigger it becomes. I think there's certainly a pattern in the many disputes that we have seen here at UK Mediation, and that all the disputes our mediators deal with week by week. You know, there's clearly an issue there in getting people to open up. When we get to the point of trying to resolve conflict, getting people actually to say what needs to be said, not to hold back on it. And a lot of what we do as mediators is setting up the right conditions so that people can have the conversation, which is obviously long overdue. It's a commonly heard comment in mediations and in most dispute resolution processes. People say, oh, if only we could have had this conversation 6 months, 2 years, 5 years ago, we wouldn't have got into this mess. So I think there's a big factor in conflict in general where we pretend there's no conflict, we deflect, we hold back on the difficult things that really need to be said, we retroflect, and I think with social media driven conflicts these effects are actually redoubled, and it's worth paying attention to that. And the last bit I want to say on this really is about factionalism. It's about how groups develop and things can go badly wrong. So around the workplace, and it's particularly writ large, I find, in open plan offices, where some people know stuff and some don't, where some people have been included in a group and some haven't. Some people are aware of where a post may have originally come from and some aren't. Euphemistic posts, you know, not naming people, not being very specific. You tend to get this in-group and out-group thing. So the factionalism is about people who know what's going on in one group and people who don't know what's going on in another group, and this can cause things to really go badly wrong. This is when we get the grievances and the harassment discrimination claims, especially if the groups identify with a particular characteristic in terms of educational background or ethnicity or gender. We get into very difficult territory where there are allegations of discrimination, unfair treatment, and favouritism. We get in-groups and out-groups, and it goes to a very bad place. So that's how social media can perpetuate conflict. We're talking about how conflict might develop, and the use of things like Facebook, Instagram and Twitter can cause conflict to develop in the first place. But however it's developed, this current screen is about how social mediator can make it worse, make it longer and deeper, and actually draw it out way beyond what it needed to be. So the next few points are about how social media can get people into trouble at work. I can't go into massive detail about social media policies. That's for another day, really. I did, in preparing this webinar, do a bit of a Google search on social media policies, and there does seem to be quite a bit of commonality to what people feel is important to have in your social media policy. But I'm not going to sort of go into, top 10 tips for social media policies. There's lots of that out there actually. LinkedIn is a good place to look. But rather, let's have a look at how social media can get people into trouble at work. First of course is the disciplinary issue about excessive use of social media during work time, and we all know the curse of the mobile phone. And speaking as somebody who's been running training courses for quite a long time, it's a difficult mix, telephones and training sessions, and I do find myself asking people to please put your phones away during training courses, and certainly around the office I know various conflicts that have arisen around disciplinary or potential disciplinary issues because of people making excessive use of social media. I was only checking my Facebook, I was just checking my tweets, but it can really get in the way of people concentrating at work and pulling their weight. And the big problem that a lot of corporate social media policies tries to address are posts that fail to distinguish between personal and professional, implying that somebody's opinions are those of their employer. Now, we've seen this in quite high profile cases actually in the news in recent months, where people have tweeted personal views, but unfortunately it's in a place where they're identified as representing their company or their organisation. So we have to be very, very careful to distinguish between when we're making a personal comment on social media and when it's about representing our employees' interests or views. And it can be something as simple as somebody with their identity card on a lanyard around the neck, using Snapchat or something like that, taking a picture and sharing it, Instagram, sharing a picture with some kind of comment on it, or a meme, and the picture in the meme is actually of you with your corporate logo on your shirt, or you're in front of your building, your company's building with the logo outside, and people actually identify your personal views with those of your employer, and that can cause, and has caused, and does cause significant problems. And I think the other thing is about private spats becoming public, and again, the print media in particular, I think, love to jump on these kind of things. No names mentioned, but the sort of less credible parts of the press, let's say, love to jump on the fact that there's private spats between people, and when these become public, they can reflect very badly on a corporate image. So, person from this company and person from that company who've fallen out, or two people within a company who've fallen out. So those private spats, those private conflicts, becoming public, and of course being amplified by less scrupulous parts of the press or of conventional media, and it getting out there, and people love to see this. We love to see conflict. I think this is a significant thing, and I think this is why programs, I'm all the time people are saying, so is what you do like Jeremy Kyle? Well, not at all. It couldn't be any more different. But these kind of programs are very popular because we like to see conflict. I think part of what happens in the psychology of it is we like to look at other people's conflicts and think, well, I'm not that bad after all. And I think another part of it that happens is that we look at people's conflict in order at some level to learn how to cope with our own conflicts. So my own belief is that we come into this work for particular reasons, and I think one of the reasons is to learn how better to deal, with our own disputes and with our own fallouts and conflicts. And I think, it's interesting to view conflict. It's interesting to look at things like Jeremy Kyle. It's interesting to know what's going on for other people, what might be going on in other companies. And I think we pay a lot of attention to people's private spats. They will very quickly become public, and for some of the reasons I mentioned earlier about how social media can perpetuate conflict, we love to comment on and post and retweet stuff about other people's conflicts. So something that begins as private can very quickly become public. And this thing about, I kept it private, it wasn't meant for everybody. I have heard this in the various disputes that we've worked with, very quite significant disputes where people have put things out on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or in a couple of cases LinkedIn, or it tends to be used less for this kind of stuff. And and they considered that it's private. They said, well, I didn't intend for anybody to see it, and as soon as I knew that it had got into the wrong hands, I deleted it. Well, too late then, because everybody's got screenshots, and the screenshot has been shared on other media, especially if it goes out, if people do screenshots and email them, and especially if they use their work accounts for emailing screenshots of hostile posts, hostile tweets. How can you possibly consider it to be private? There's no way that anything that goes out over these platforms could possibly be considered to be private. So I think these are some things that can get people into trouble at work. So we're talking about workplace disputes, we're talking about how social media can cause the conflict in the first place, how it can perpetuate it, but actually these things lead into us thinking about what do you need for a social media policy. So like I say, I can't do a comprehensive coverage of it, but let's have a think about some of these things that seem to appear in most people's social media policies. So corporate policies around what you can and can't do at work to avoid some of these quite significant problems. What is needed? What do we have to have in a social media policy to avoid some of these particularly problems that would deepen and perpetuate conflict? First thing sounds obvious, but let's get users to make a clear distinction between their use of personal and company accounts. So we need a disclaimer on there somewhere that says these are my personal views, they're not the views of my company. Or conversely, this is the corporate view and is not the personal view of anybody employed by this company. So we've got to make a clear distinction. It should be on every post. It should be on your your screen, identifying screen on your Twitter account. It should be there in your description on your Facebook page. A clear distinction between when it's you and when it's your company. Sounds obvious, but a lot of people don't do it, and it's actually the thing that has led to quite a few problems in the past. So that's the explicit disclaimer about posts being your own or those of your employers. Also, in terms of a social media policy for people who would ever use these media for work, is no trash talk, as the Americans like to call it. Assume that the target of your post is going to read what you write. And my question is, would you say it to their face? So we've got to assume that whatever you put up there is going to be seen by the person that that it's about. And if you wouldn't say it to their face, don't put it out on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. It's fair to say, and if in doubt, do now. Really, plenty of people I've spoken to who've been involved in conflicts that have gone this way, and where there's been an issue of social media, they would usually say, let's call it 100% of the time, they would say, I wish I just hadn't pressed the send button. I wish I just hadn't pressed the post button. Because it got into the wrong hands, the wrong person heard it, and this is what's caused all the problems. So don't assume that anything's going to be private. Don't assume that the thing isn't going to be seen by the person. It probably is. Okay, so let's talk about what else might be needed in your social media policy. A few other points. A rule that a retweet with no comment does imply that you're endorsing the original content. So always add a neutralizing comment on your own, something to the effect of, putting it in your own words and saying, look what somebody has said, or here's somebody's view. So saying, look, this is the view of Donald Trump or whoever. I'm sorry, I'm picking on him today, but a neutralizing comment of your own that makes it clear that it's not necessarily your own view, and not just blandly retweeting stuff without sort of making it clear that you don't necessarily share the view of the tweet. It's something that you want people to see, but you don't endorse or share the view that's been represented in that tweet. Just make it clear it's not your own view. And also check your privacy settings on Facebook so you know what you're sharing. It sounds obvious, but it's something that has given rise to significant problems in our experience. So just check your privacy setting. Know who's seeing what. Know what you are sharing and know with whom you're sharing it. And it comes back again to the thing I've said a couple of times in a couple of ways. Don't assume that anything on the internet is private, by whatever medium it's arrived there. So I can't go into the fine detail of this, but excuse me a second, I need to cough. I can't go into the fine detail of this, but if you have a look at that link there, you should be able to click through on that link. It's from Hootsuite, so all credit to Hootsuite, thank you. for examples of these and other social media policies. And what they've got on there is they've replicated lots of well-known companies' social media policies. The things I've pulled out there are the things that seem to appear in pretty well everybody's social media policies. So they're quite generic. And I've got something in our own social media policy at UK Mediation. You can imagine it's particularly sensitive. We've got to be very careful what we talk about. So these things about being sure when it's private and when it's public, never just retweeting without comment, making the assumption that your everything that could be seen will be seen, and also that the target of anything will be always be seen. Just be careful what you're saying. So the question now is really, can we use social media as a force for conflict resolution? So we're talking about how social media can get us into conflict. Can it get us out as well? Well, I'm not as keen on this as some people are. You might hear different opinions about this in terms of online mediation and using chat rooms for mediation or conflict resolution. For me, there's no substitute for getting people together for a thorough conversation. And a lot of the time, I don't want to do myself out of business here, but what we're doing as mediators is we're setting up the right conditions for people to have the argument they should have had weeks or months ago. And it's as simple as that. And I think there are all sorts of understandable reasons why we don't have those conversations, but essentially what we're doing as mediators is having a better argument, and I think the best arguments are those that can be held face to face. The dialogue, the robust and assertive dialogue, where we're acknowledging that we might have a different or possibly controversial view to another person, where we're getting into a forum where we're encouraged to directly drive into the conflict, not to deflect, where we're encouraged to check out other people's thoughts and feelings and withdraw those projections that I was mentioning earlier, and making sure that even the difficult things do get said. So we are undoing these retroflections. We're making sure that people aren't hanging on to things that need to be said. And for me, this is about dialogue building. For me, this is what mediation's all about. This is what we do as conflict resolvers, is we cause these better dialogues to happen. So with all that sort of as a preamble, can we actually use social media? Well, okay, if we consider that clearing the air in any form is better than not clearing the air at all, then fair enough. So we might be able to use something like Google Hangouts for having a group chat to clear the air. We might be able to, something as simple as a WhatsApp group might be good, so that everybody can see what everybody else is posting. There's no selective posting or excluding people from the group, but actually coming to that forum in order to have the conversation that's overdue might allow us to clear the air, and doing it in any form is better than not clearing the air at all. And looking at doing it in a forum is better than drumming out angry emails to one or two people at a time. Quite often when our mediators go into disputes, the referrer or the manager or head of department in which the workplace conflict has grown up will say, do you want to see the email trail? And if you do that, you're liable to be going away with a wheelbarrow full of paper, because once conflict starts, and once people especially start doing VCCs on their emails, it can really make it worse. So even one of the most old-fashioned forms of social media, email, can in itself cause problems for us. And if this is something that's happened, then my inclination and my encouragement to people is to say, okay, if you can't get together physically, at least if you can come into a forum, it's better than continuing to bat out these angry emails to one or two people, especially with the BCC, where some people are going to see what's been said and they don't know who else is seeing it, or it's not been sent to everybody. Okay, let's walk towards it. Let's have a conversation where everybody knows what's being said. We can say the difficult things, we can acknowledge we've got different views, we can withdraw the projections, we can get the stuff out on the table and do the retroflexion, and actually get to the point where we know what other people are thinking and feeling and don't have to guess it, and where we are feeling safe enough and supported enough that we can actually have that difficult conversation. So I would say yes, if we consider those things. Social media might be a force for conflict resolution. On the other hand, I would say no, if you consider that really it needs to be kept private. I think mediation, one of the ways it works is by having the privacy, the confidentiality around it, so that people can say something that they may never say in another forum. It's fair to say, having done this for 19 years or so, and many hundreds of workplace disputes that I've mediated, the privacy makes a big difference. So having a bit of private time with people prior to getting them together with the other body allows people to say things that they're really not going to say in any other forum. It allows people to really open up, to be open and honest, and to put their cards on the table in a big way. And I think the privacy is important. There are issues with this in online dispute resolution. One thing about this is that using things that look a bit like Skype, there are dedicated packages for doing online mediation. But it's very difficult to get around the problem that you don't know who else is in the room, you don't know who else might be listening, and it's very hard to know whether somebody is recording proceedings. We get people to sign up to agreements that declare that this is not the case, but it is very hard to police. And I've done a number of online mediation cases over networking software or Skype-like dedicated packages, and we get people to declare and to actually sign up to an agreement that says no, there's nobody else in the room, there's no recording, nobody can overhear it, but there is that element of doubt about it. And I think in particular, and there are a number of organisations in some of the more sensitive work that we do, and for them there's no way they would do online dispute resolution. It just feels too leaky, it feels too insecure. So that's a problem. And I also think, I mean, I've done many mediations where it's been about drier, less personal disputes, and we can make a good online discussion happen if participants are willing to give it a go. So I've done some neighbourhood disputes, I've done in online mediation, many workplace situations that have been resolved to people's satisfaction, but these tend to be the drier, less emotional, less heartfelt disputes, where it's something more personal, where there's a need for that more full-on expression from one party to another, and especially where significant hurt has been caused. I think we really have to get people together face to face. So call me old-fashioned, but my own view is that it's the uncomfortable, difficult, overdue conversation that needs to be held. For me, it needs to be held face to face. I think to be able to see the whites of the other person's eyes, actually to fully appreciate the impact of one another's behaviours, it's an important thing to do. I've heard it suggested that for where there are situations where sexual harassment's been alleged, infringing on people's personal space, and even where there's been unwelcomed or inappropriate touching in the workplace, this is a good indication that you need to use online mediation. I don't really agree with that view. I think, especially in those cases, I think under well-controlled conditions with some agreed rules and some very firmly held boundaries, I think the most important thing is to get people actually across the table to say, here's how what you've done has affected me, and here's what I need from you in order that we can get on as colleagues. And for people to really hear that thoroughly, I don't think we can do that by hiding behind a keyboard. So this is my personal and corporate view. If I'm just gonna walk the walk and practice what I preach, these are my views. These are our company's views. This is our approach to these ideas about online dispute resolution. There's a place for it. I don't think it's as thorough and as full on and as heartfelt as we need it to be. Where it is these these stuff that goes deeper and stuff that's more hurtful and more personal. I think get people together is the answer. There we have a lot of my ideas about using social media, what happens in terms of social media to producing conflict, what happens in terms of it perpetuating conflict, and whether it can be used as a force for conflict resolution. This comes up, all of these topics come up in many disputes that we work with. Our mediators are out there all the time. Majority of workplace disputes now, there is some involvement of social media, and certainly in neighbourhood disputes there is involvement of social media where people are posting hostile posts on Facebook in particular. We cover a lot of these topics. We cover how to resolve conflict that may have arisen from these kind of problems or been exacerbated by these kind of platforms. We talk about how to resolve conflict for managers in our 1 and 2 day mediation skills courses. We can train you to be an accredited mediator and qualify you with a level 4 externally accredited training course as a mediator. If you want to be able to be on hand, to be available to resolve the sorts of conflicts that go a bit deeper and that really get into the point where you're at the threshold of formal procedures. So our training will lead you to the point where you can be competent and confident as a mediator for workplace disputes, ready to be able to resolve the kind of stuff that can arise from everything that I've been talking about this afternoon. Conflict coaching, it's something that we find is used in particular in this area, where some people seem to find themselves continually coming into conflict with others, where they struggle to have robust or difficult conversations without it turning into a dispute. Our conflict coaching is a highly effective way to provide a more intensive one-to-one intervention with people so that they can avoid the problems that can arise from either direct communication or communication through social media. Just learning the skills and gaining the confidence to be able to avoid continually coming into conflict. We also offer services for team and one-to-one mediation, so the team conflicts that I've talked about can arise where you've got this factionalism that I was talking about, or where some people are excluded from groups or forums, other people are included. You might be looking at a team mediation in that case, or it might be to do with just something that's happened between two people, in which case you've got your one-to-one mediation. So we offer those services as well, and if you want a package that we don't mention, we specialise in in-house training and consultancy packages. If you need to look at how to resolve conflict in your workplace using the skills and techniques of mediation, then we're the people to call. Okay, so there's some of the stuff that we can offer. I'll try and keep that bit short. It's just our salesy bit. Very welcome to give us a shout after the webinar, or you may have questions right now. So if there's anything you'd like to raise just now, I'm just going to catch my breath for a second. So questions and comments, and I'll be very pleased to address those right now. So we've got a question here about, would you ban the use of Facebook at work? And I think my answer to that is that I've seen, based on the evidence, I've seen a lot of companies who have sensible and enforceable social media policies. And I don't think so, really. I don't think it's necessary to completely ban it. If we treat our workers as adults, and expect that if we've got reasonable rules in place, which are negotiated and agreed with employees for all the right reasons, I don't see why we should have to have a total blanket ban on the use of social media at work. It's about when you use it, it's about what you use it for, it's about how you qualify your posts, as to whether they're personal, professional, and having some sensible rules in place. For example, no trash talk, a sort of training. I think there's a training need in some organisations that I've come across for people to appreciate that it's not going to be private what you post on there, and you are at work. You shouldn't be expected to be spending large chunks of time actually checking your Facebook, etc. So no, I don't think you need a blanket ban, but I think there's a right and a wrong way to get to a point of having a sensible, enforceable, negotiated and agreed social media policy, and I've seen it work perfectly well. Got a comment here. There's just in the chat box there. We've got the link up there referring to the social media policies, the examples of social media policies that you might be able to have a look at and download and see that there are those generic points in there. And a comment there from John Owen as well. Thanks, John. A reminder that really avoiding turf wars and face-to-face communications the key to avoiding these types of conflicts. I quite agree, John. I think there's no substitute for a thorough, assertive and robust conversation face to face. I think we can't, we don't, it doesn't help to avoid these conversations, and I think social media is actually a way of avoiding that kind of more intense contact, and we shouldn't hide behind it. So whilst we take any further comments or questions, I'm just going to move on a little bit, and just to say to you, it's a pleasure to be with you here this afternoon and to be presenting this webinar. We do have other webinars coming up, so do register for any further webinars. We've got one coming up about becoming a workplace mediator, so there's some information on this one about you know, what you need to do, how you build a reputation and grow your experience and get credibility. This might be for people who are thinking of being in-house workplace mediators, or possibly you're thinking of becoming a freelance, or maybe you are a freelance who wants to add the skills and techniques of mediation into what you do. Webinar on mediating salary disputes coming up in a few weeks, very much in the news at the moment. Certain organisations, the BBC, etc. You know, workplace mediation can be a great way to address disputes that arise around pay-related issues, and that's coming up middle of May. And then the end of June, we've got one on neighbourhood mediation, talking about how we can, you know, use these techniques of mediation for neighbours and tenants to communicate better, understand where each other is coming from, and come up with ideas of how to end your disputes. So all of this and more is publicised on our various social media. Haha. We would welcome you initially to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. So you know, if you've enjoyed the webinar, please like. And if you want to be notified about upcoming webinars as well, you subscribe to our channel, and you will get notifications about what's around the corner. Follow us on Twitter. We post regularly on Twitter, including stuff about social media, and the details are up there. You're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn, and our Facebook page is there as well. So all of our social media, after that long rant about social media, and then there we are, we rely on it quite a lot, we use it quite a lot. It's a great way to get stuff out in a rapidly changing field, very interesting field of mediation. So you're very welcome to keep in touch with us through any of those media. And that's about me for this afternoon. So thanks ever so much for joining us. I've kept time today, and about 3/4 of an hour in there. Thanks a lot for joining us. Do keep in touch, and it's a pleasure to have been with you this afternoon, and have a great weekend.